the first MFA student reading of the year. My name is Jillian, and I'm super excited to be welcoming you all, even though it's kind of sad that we can't be in person and have to be over Zoom. So the three readers tonight are Jasmine, Misael, and Valerie. And I just want to get this started and introduce Marie, who will be introducing Jasmine. Take it away.
Hey, okay, so Jasmine Ortiz, let's see, it's my introduction. She's in the margins watching. She's in the camera lens, the eye eyeing the eye. She's behind the paper and also on the paper, wondering if paper is enough, if seeing is enough, if perception creates our chaos, or if the quiet musing we slip into when we're alone, despite being encircled by others, is one of our own choosing. A special haunt. She's in the way leaves fall, not in how they plummet, but how they softly turn, how their bodies are slightly crisped by the edges, folding in the air, undulating with a dozen others, all twitching together in the rising wind. She's, well, a writer. I could speak about Jasmine's graduation from the University of San Diego, her BA in English, minoring in creative writing and Spanish, or her interests in dogs, swimming, and baking. But her love for fiction and nonfiction, both of which resemble creased photo albums, warm to the touch and mind, goes beyond her academic background or hobbies. She's a writer fascinated by turmoil and the turbulent storms that occupy our minds, the worn-out world around us. She's a writer who, quite simply, observes keenly, empathizes eagerly, and is patient enough to follow up my panicked gift messages with an equal amount of panicked gift messages, the most memorable of which was a snap of a scene from Grey's Anatomy with the caption, "Somebody sedate me," until our chats mimicked the very same photo album her writing embodies, albeit digitized to a third degree. But I digress. When she reads tonight, look for her words in your periphery. She's watching you, but also not. An intersection occurs between our interiority and physical reality. A storm gathering shape, quietly brewing, and she's there. She, with pen in hand, raised head angled to a sharp degree, is always there. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming tonight Jasmine Ortiz.
Thank you, Marie. That was so nice. So I'm going to be reading the beginning of a short story called Sakale. I know some of you guys have heard it, but I took out some sections, so it just for the sake of time. But yeah, so overall, I think it's about silence and repetition and just really the power of observational healing and the serenity that doing things again and again and observing can bring. So I'm going to start reading. There's something about the way his eyes look in the sun. She'd never seen eyes like his before, golden when the light touched them, green when he wore that Gulf of Mexico blue, soft brown when the shadows took over, and sometimes when everything in the world lined up perfectly and the sunset turned the sky pinkish salmon hue. His eyes could look at you and turn a color so dark they'd look almost impossibly kyanite blue. But right now, as they sit on the pontoon, the water around them steady and murky and stained by algae-colored beryl, he isn't looking at her. There's a rod in his hand, and he's wearing a straw hat. He didn't shave last night. The little streams of sun coming through the straw dance along his face, making the tiny hair shimmer. He never shaved before fishing. They fished a lot, sat in silence a lot, especially during the early morning hours when they knew they were awake before the rest of the world, especially when they sat on the water, rods in hand or in the rod holders. There is no silence like fishing silence. It's because it's not a true silence. There's always something happening in nature. Today, there's the noise of the lapping water, the heron flapping its wings, the sound of the little baby shad quietly flip-flopping on the deck when they slip out of her hand, escaping the number 2 hook. "That's the 6th one you've dropped," he says. His eyes are focused on the water, but when she cuts her eyes at him, she can see the way his mouth is quirked. "They're really slippery," she says. "Sure," he says. She's not lying. The shiners are slippery, and live bait is tricky, especially if you have a sort of dilemma with the notion of those 2 words being strung together, live and bait. She is one of the people who fish, but also face this dilemma. So in her mind, when she dips the little net into the bait box and picks one of the little silver fish out of it, she figures if the little guy slips through her fingers, it's probably natural selection taking back control. This is exactly what she's thinking when she lets another one go and leans over the railing, her eyes following the tiny thing as it pumps water back into its gills and swims beyond view. She smiles, places her hand on the railing, and rests her chin on it. She knows he's watching her. "Don't think I don't know what you're doing," he says. She shrugs. He laughs. She looks back at him, teeth white against shadowed skin, and wishes she could touch the sound of his laughter. Everything sounds different on water, and she wishes she could capture this sound, place it in a mason jar, and put it on a windowsill. Keep the sound forever. "Remember the first time we did this?" she says. He's looking out at the water. There's a little tug on the line and he yanks, sets the hook, looks over at her, his eyes changing color as the water dances in them, and reels. "Of course," he says. "Feels like such a long time ago," he says. Then silence but for the sound of the unlucky Sakale being pulled out of his world and into theirs. She watches his hands work. This is the best part. The way his hands, big and full of veins bursting with blood, move seamlessly. Use the big net to fish the crappie out of the water. Grab the pliers to unhook the number 2 from the catch's bony mouth. She watches him, his hat tipped back from the slight strain of reeling, the muscles connected to the phalanges making the tendons in his forearms contract as his fingers work the hook this way and that. She doesn't even notice the sharp tug on her own rod sitting prettily on the rod holder. Doesn't even really care that the bait died in vain. She's remembering the first time she came out here with him, remembering now how similar each time since then had been. She remembers the sound the bed made when his body left it, the smell of a crisp dawn slowly creeping in through the cracked window, the way he asked questions that needed simple answers, that Dijon mustard-colored hat, and his hand reaching up to grab it from the hook. She remembers the way he looked ahead as he drove, the color of the sky was as the sun started to rise, the sound of the thin metal Shimano rods in the back of the truck as the rod eyes softly came together. "We'll go fishing," he said. She remembers being on land and then being over it in the water of the lake. She remembers. "You need a Zebco reel," he said, "and you also need a 15-pound test line," he said. "Why a test line?" she'd said. "Because it's a test," he'd said. She'd said. Quiet for a second, and then, "It's like a test to see when the fish will snap the line," he said. "Okay, that makes sense," she'd said. She remembers this shiner, slippery and slimy in her hand. "If you want to fish, you have to bait the rod yourself," he said. She remembers looking at him in the fishing silence. "Sure," she said. "Look," he said, "it's easy. Take the shad, take the hook, and stick it through one eye, out the other," he said. She remembers doing it. She remembers wanting to cry for the little baby shad. She remembers putting the Shimano on the rod holder as they moved from one spot to another and watching the tiny silver fish moving along as it dangled from the hook. "How is it still alive?" she said. He shrugged, the navy of his shirt making his shaded eyes flash golden blue. "Don't you think it's kind of gross that we're using baby fish to catch bigger fish?" she'd asked him. They'd been out on the water for a while. He sat for a moment. "Huh?" she said. "Why gross?" he said. "It's just part of fishing." He shrugged. He'd pulled the yellowfin baseball cap off and flipped it backwards, the tips of his hair poking out through the hat's closure. "But it's cannibalism," she said. He looked at her then. She remembers. His eyes changing color, looking teal against the Dijon mustard yellow. "Okay," his eyes seemed to say. "I'll bite," they'd said, and he had.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. That was really wonderful. And I believe the next introducer is PJ. All right, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Whatever's happened now, know the ground dances to your clouds, and being in peace, one gambles pieces of ground. It is with sincere gratitude that I introduce to you all tonight the poet Misael Osorio-Conde. In late August of 2019, I had the pleasure of meeting Misael as we began our work here in South Bend. His conscientiousness, friendliness, and perceptivity left an undeniable impression upon me right off the bat. Misael's is a presence which I will never forget, and I consider myself lucky to have met him. I mention this not as a mere sentiment, but because it is the same attunement and awareness which shakes readers to their core as we encounter his work. His poetry scours the planet through culture, geography, and biology, sparing no bones and leaving no rock unturned. Often, Misael tunes his ear to the wind, imprinting whirls and dives of sound into the silt from which we were birthed. In other moments, his style is enticingly visual, as hallucinations and metamorphoses divulge themselves to us with a hypnotics that'll hang in your head for days on end. My friend Misael trades in the annihilation of all confinements. In my mind, his poetics is a jailbreak. As I watched a recording of over 800 prisoners peel free through the streets of Brazil in mid-March, I could sense Misael's poetry buzz through the static. His poems rip through these streets, these fields, these deserts, with the glint of a power that defies human containment. He writes, "I've been learning not to follow, mangled by optimistic rules of exchange, so everything that lives can have whatever name it would." His work is forthcoming from Deluge and Storyscape, and I recommend each of you keep an eye out for these publications. For now, though, I ask you all to take a few deep breaths, center yourselves, and listen to the grass as it winds and overcomes us. Misael, we are lucky to be with you. The floor is yours.
PJ, thank you very much. That was amazing. I'm touched by your friendship, and I don't think I can give an introduction to my poems better than you have, so I'm just gonna go into them. And the first one is number boxes. Equally convinced, where things that have run their course do not forget to define even my own understanding, approximates an infinity towards sand, as affinity towards sand, or lateness of the fog. And though with its pestilence hovering as a personal cloud, prefers my soul's shoes to mitigate its blooming boredom. I don't want to deal with numbers, I tell the dog in an effort to discourage his professions. As if math could stand for branches, it does for the dog, but only in silence. Precocious crossing means nothing. I know how to count days. Remember when nothing shines, when nothing breathes, when we knew how to stay alive at all? The boat replies, I tell pilgrims that on the other side, we are the opposite of darkness. Whatever we came here for, I open my eyes, ask them to stop the drilling, but they wouldn't, so I wouldn't either. I was just noise, trapped between the towers, and galactic ghosts following for days my shadows, nibble on the carbonic residue of skulls. If 100 years were to pass, we wouldn't be any wiser. The second poem is called That There Was Failure in the Naming on my part. To accommodate bodies, unlike mine completed. Nameless tree, I have no way of telling who you are. I have no way to stay behind like you, my home chihuahua. I peel since I have a precondition, call it predilection for fragmentation, and no tongue to lick my lips, to say poison, burning redundant organs, lifting hands, lifting its fingers to my lips. How an answer that's all at once, one with the voice, from which Hawa says, I'm forever a fever praying in answer, staying behind reverence accommodates the body I have prayed for, with the boys burning, and the green socks I took from the boy's body before he could wake up, begin the praying. Water as a mother. But if they were echoes, they will dance, I suppose, dance in roaring, not murmur, tune not in tune, as it makes no sense to try and hold me so by wings. I will, I suppose, still hold, not just nibble, you in prayer, hold you suspended in fog, fury of fires, sporangia shooting up in prayer, dust heaving but no wind, the way it happens in morning, suspended in me, heavy, not suggested, less than precious metal, because I, not just in you, because I am you, though less dense to eat, to rub, to break, through fine mornings, through stone, jump concrete that teach there, the bones and fibers dense in me, more back, wet, more, murmur, mojado, wet, it sticks, wet to any sort of skin, and bags that carry cocoa beans, panela beans, beans, beaner, once bean, seed, bean, you, ways, be in you, bean, you, fog, bean, you, mojado, like you, like us, like any other, if it lives, it must be. A reply to stone. Water, when the water vapor eyes that morning out of the burning sand, it was no paralysis at first. At first, that root, bloom, and rot did a snake crawl down. I heaved in chest, whiz in chase, went up where the blue spit fire of an ant in my mouth could not become, believe its tongue could choke, and it was moving a sink in ground, fall with my limbs and chain and pull that never. When the water vapor singed the diamond mouth fence, I couldn't cry out anymore because my mouth was stuffed with questions. I was not asking, though their faces kept on saying, in God do trust, lucky here a line begins in glow, in red tears count only when you're born on this side, and a water bottle is a sign, otherwise no name to write a poem nor number ever cry amen. And Lord makes more ali. And as I faded out, I saw the tree where you were hung in the shade of stone, rain in leaves, a trace of heat again, that laughter by a red hot sun after that dog chew and turn and pull, and you were prayer, you were no show or shadow or eye, sleep, sins, and Lord. I am the water that drowns me. This one's Candor Bloom's Blushy Feathers. For you, the whole year of hell, it is in adoration, surrender, so what you leave there, rather than suggestions, I have a thing to burn. In genocide completed, went there too, in colors to save children from adorning, any metal will do. I breathe, but so do you. Say God made me a burning. You say what I encountered flying up there was sinful, and I did not come, not seen burning ferns beyond dusk. I did not want to know how to give. Remedios School of Medicine. Empire, in the heaven of your ceiling, we have read your questioning glances. Bluntly put, that is the reason why everything in our house grew wings, and our hands bloom into honeycombs. Kill and rob and back to life, we now tend to your lungs. Like all Americans could not know where arteries and veins propagated from the heart into your dreams, where we crinkle in the plastic of our groceries. And all we were praying for was banana peels to cook features in, or to carry us forward into the nights with the homeless on Skid Row. Even traveling atop the beast will not have repairs, and the train with its littered containers said, they won't dare to lick your fingers. How even the chickens and the turkeys with their collapsed ribs sticking out fled away from sidewalks at our approach, with our lips like lumps of sugar kissing the ground, not obvious or not for the people gawking at the Macy's parade, bloated, floating above our heads. That is how they were themselves, not looking for the supersymmetries and other factorial means of meditation, empire. In the heaven of your ceiling, we have read your questioning glances. Name preferences. Understand gunding as a rowing practice. Here, limbs creak when flying low skies. For someone without shoes, plastic makes that sound. The trick is just to smile to the drum flashing MX missiles, place to detect loud movements, placed strategically at every port of entry, framing our age as one of walls, primitive trails, as of now, trails in the climbing, jumping dry ditches too. Was Emma turned sour, said, allow me in the jump to question the mirror smiles, and hopping and a few wrinkles, beaming us to a destination lacking vapor. And that won't do the beam, Mrs. Do, though these places of carbon just keep churning flashes in answer to speed when elevated to cubes. And I'm already here counting mercury drops, advancing a theory of holes in the stomach lining, what's of early hours in the glamour of their light. Devoted to patience, an empire grows. I hear its music, pink, a festive rhythm. I've been learning not to follow, mango by optimistic rules of exchange. So everything that lives can have whatever name, a boom. What's your shop? I've lived certainties, and so I have no tongue to steal. Like you tree, I did not burn my bones. Discarded, they took up flight, and then it's all at once redundant. How in answer the ferns have gone and told of reverence, that the baking was heavy, that the turkey was tough with mold, that the meatballs lacked flavor if there were no toenails in it. I am shivering after effects. I am shivering in after effects. I wouldn't tell anyone. How the dog put his red bread on my face while I tasted the tiny stars in the sun and my sweat has lost its substance. Mom, we've only offered our beans burnt in lard. It's all we ever had. Our tortillas like ours. I wouldn't tell anyone. My shoulders scream redundant. Fever forever lost in its burning song. Through the rhythm and the throbbing. Say you wouldn't tell it to the blinding noise of rage, the blowing glare, eyes that knew not how to read, the leaves in my face. They had water, we had none. I wasn't sweating anymore. I saw their hairy legs. I saw their contorting mouths. One said, Palo Verde doesn't move. We have brownies all under control. Mama waters. Would I tell anyone I'm allergic to cocoa beans? I believe only. History will catch them in mid-flight. History will growl in their faces, will growl in yours too. Its spittle will blind you. History will howl, no, give me badly my country back. History will find you in the center after it has leaked all the marrow in the center, you and the guy in green entwined. After it has chewed your shells to splinters, after it has chewed you all down to sparks, history will find you covered in big wasps, not even holding onto the syphilitic rags you refused to give up after losing the goal, after the women left. Chewing, the machine goes. People always come in droves. Their hands touch everything. The butcher's hope. His hand grew purple. Then people came in droves to celebrate the shovel woman, blue-eyed with black-headed child, drunk swimmer, legless abandon. New people for her bloody floor, how their hands touch everything, dull knives, greasy tables, looking for crumbs. Though nothing was left in the wet corners, their hands hid his, only blood. So no work was done for the day. ad-lib certainties, touch as it lays. This is the last one. Thank you for being here. Mistaken. A wish was feathered to the thought. Fact I made, there was a green silence in the sky I could not bear. Fact I made green silence, and the bird could trace its reflection in the pool so that it knew. The bird knew reflection, how it came to pass. The ditch ate what it could not bite, what it used to pass it came, the ditch was used. And then I knew how the bird did it, that eagle fractured us in factors. And then I knew you in fractions, because I did find bending my fingers to eat grass and sugar knives, because I did find sugar in your eyes. So this of praying, things the world will fail to recognize, to witness lays. So this playing has painted the difference between sometime, arms we were again, the difference between eye shades, so that collecting I am what must be, life, so that collecting what I must, tell people all around us. Suddenly, I put my arm around you. I put my arms around you suddenly, so let me say I was forgiven, all is forgotten. You let me say forgiven. Do you remember seeing was a time after or even during the crossing? Do you remember a time to fuck? Didn't have a word for how it felt in the mouth. Didn't have a word for fuck. Just said raspy in the mouth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Misael. It's been such a pleasure working with you in workshop. And so I want to just introduce our final introducer, Elise.
Awesome. Thank you, Jillian. Okay. Valerie Virginia Vargas is a Venezuelan-American poet and printmaker from South Florida. Her work can be found in Jellyfish Magazine, Pink Magazine as a part of the Latinx Lit Celebration. She is forthcoming in Typo Magazine and in Waterproof, book 2 of the Miami trilogy, published by Hailey Books. Valerie's poems exist in the liminal space of a basic existential problem: what it means to be a finite being with an infinite capacity to feel and to desire. In Valerie's poems, this problem often appears around the joint metaphor of sickness and sweetness, the desire to have, to be, and to taste what feels good, almost always undercut by an upset stomach, a price that is paid. Yet this problem is not only played out on a personal and spiritual level. In instances where the sweetness of romantic love ultimately results in pain, or where the speaker yearns but is unable to commune with a celestial body, such as in the line, "While I look at the stars and Jupiter for answers, the mortality is pulsating in my veins." Valerie's poems also show us that this problem is relevant to the communal and global issues we now face. In Valerie's apocalyptic post-pastoral poetry, there is the sense that self-indulgence, an excessive desire for sweetness, is connected somehow to the destruction or sickness of our environment. This is not to suggest that the state of the environment is merely a manifestation of a human problem, but to create a bridge between our personal problems and our global or communal ones, to dissolve the boundary between them, to get us to feel the gravity and urgency of environmental destruction, and to urge us to really ask, how are we going to face this? When Valerie's speaker, quote, meets the devil by a billboard on the side of the road, another motif in her work, the reference is not only to the devil in the form of a persona, a being, or a character, but also to the devil who speaks through the hell is real kind of language that is printed on billboards across the Midwest. This is to say that in Valerie's poems, language itself is imbued with the utmost power. And just as it has the potential to continue to act violence in our world, it has equal, if not more, potential to help us move towards some kind of collective healing. Please join me in welcoming Valerie Vargas.
Oh wow, thank you, Elise. That was very nice. Oh my gosh, I'm touched. I'm going to start by reading two poems that aren't mine. I hope everyone's okay with that. This first poem is from A Drink of Red Mirror by Kim Hae-soon. It's titled Her Music. The sea's tired. It's tired of billowing. It doesn't want to do any more coming and going. How the clammy breeze surrounds my body and won't let go. Because the earth is round and my embrace is round. How time comes and goes all the same. Whether it's tomorrow or yesterday. How the same lighthouse shines on and off like tireless night. How every part of the tongue remembers the terribly salty taste of the balding island's heel. I'm tired of that. How the sun whispers, I'll take you far away. Always makes love and leaves, setting in my body every night. I'm tired of all that. The longest story in the world is an ocean of stories Shiva told his wife. In 700,000 words, they say it takes 500 days just to listen to it without eating or sleeping. How bored was Shiva's wife? The story heard every night, changing positions. I want to put it to bed by unraveling each beam of sunlight and weaving a blanket with a sunrise pattern. The sea's tired. It's tired of billowing. Maybe that's why it came all the way to my room. The cold and icy body came and went crying. I felt so sorry for the sea. With a warm teardrop, I hugged its crouched blue body. And this other poem is Loose Strife with Apiary by Srikanth Reddy from Facts for Visitors. Watched a man watch a man. One man made smoke out of nothing by scraping together 2 stones. Another kept time using nothing but stones. One man made love, another made pain with a stone in each hand. Somebody take out these stitches, I'm ready to open my eyes. So this is the new world, just like the old, only brighter. Word is the governor's wife scattered loose strife in the barnyard thinking it chicken feed, and the wetlands turned purple overnight. We make ready vectors for smallpox and language, books on magnetic tape, books on bookkeeping, on being, on coping, and beekeeping. I could have told you, all it takes is a meadow and nerve. Come, let me show you the recycled cosmos inside my apiary. A veil on a peg, queen deep in the sweetness. Okay. I'm learning to fall in love again. These days feel like all I've done exists unfinished. Half-hemmed pants hanging off the corner shelf. 3/4 of a conversation about what really happened the night in the field behind the middle school. A half-drunk mug of coffee that's been sitting out for half a day. Sometimes when I open my eyes, the first thing I see is your face, framed in dark green leaves and the pitch of purple skies and white clouds and the wind moving through. Then the wall, soft gray and trembling. It's raining inside. When I disappear and you can't find me in the walls of this house, will you open a window, let me leaf and petal in the wind, and crawl back inside when the dirt settles? A housefly once said, I am, grateful to have this stove, this window-facing garden. I have written my name with pebbles, and a colony of ants dig through it. Once, I got hung up on a tablespoon of honey, nearly drowned in half a cup of iced tea. My husband came home and pulled me out by the wings, drip-dried me and let me soak into a paper towel, my chest sputtering tea drops, legs numb from treading. He looked at me. From the angle of the kitchen light, he said, Honey, you've got to stop trying to drown yourself. From a past life. Once, sipping water from the edge of a river, a warm rabbit chased the sun into a vacant hollow, void of light, of dirt, of yellow eyes. Dandelions sprouted from the ceiling of the blueberry night, plucked from the bushel of a million little skies. Once upon a time, a rabbit was sipping water from the edge of a river, and one snake-bitten came to cut her foot clean off her hock. She began to cry and cry and cry, rivers the lengths of moonbeams that tore down street lights, emptied houses. Men had to build bridges to cross them. Once I tried to swim the rivers and was swept deeply enough to emerge from a flare in the sun. Can your skin remember? Remember when that sun shattered into a million little lights and you learned to throw yourself deeply into the blueberry sky. When I met the devil, he told me everything was going to be okay. I'd eat candy with the wrappers, case the raindrops into lollipops under lonely cypress for the overcast boys made of dirt, with Spanish moss for hair and muddy knees. And when the rain comes, the children get lost again. Gods change, people stay the same. There were 3 dead deer before I knew how to hunt for God, but all I pull is his dirty son alive and rutting grooves along the highway routes. Walking on the sun, sucking on lollipops, blowing bubbles with his tongue, knowing the future. I am wrist deep where children disappear, burying the teeth I pulled. Sulfuric springs boil over the bridge. I hear the hounds howling from where I wait near the cypress. Anthology of Wildflowers. I grew lovesick. All I could do was eat flowers. I started picking buttercups and dropped the buttons on my tongue. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I'd melt, then find myself near fences and meadows with overgrown grass long after curfew, tea candles, and matchsticks to guide me. I picked as many as I could and hid them in my fur behind my ears. I split myself every day just to know I could have them. My fur was yellowing. I would hiccup and butter would bubble from my mouth. The sky used to drop nails on me and it stopped sobbing for a while. My grandma started to notice my restlessness. She watched me hop outside after dinner one day, said, "Dígame, mija, ¿cuándo vas a dejar de comer flores silvestres?" She even started to vary our meals, sprinkle Spanish needles on salads and boil hojas de llantén for tea, but they weren't buttercups. I grew hungry. Nothing tasted anymore. The ground was shaking again and the marshes began to drought like my eyes and redden. The sky cracked in half. I started to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig until the ground caved in and my paws caught the water rushing in its mouth. Behold, a wild horse. It rained so much the city turned into a quarry. The pillars of gray swept away the nest of a bird who kept the sky bound to the horizon. The birds grasping at the sutures, clouds puffing at the seams, and the blood moons rising. Having heard news about the future, I learned how to kill a man. His eyes arched at the iron, flushed lashes flickering on the wind, rolling off the back of a mountain, tearing at the dawn of a pale horse. And I've met that rider before passing through the shadows. In a dream, my children crawl and clung to my back. I was a mountain and bore a cave for them to sleep in. It rained so much. Having seen the future, I learned how to catch a fever. Mama said the pistol is the devil's right hand, by the highwaymen. I shot a man. Now my ears are inside out. He walked away, trekking maple syrup all over the floor until the last drop. He deflated like a sock that lost its foot. I have to apologize to the cleaning crew who came in with wax and mops and found his footprints tacked with dust and feathers. I didn't mean to ruffle myself this way, screaming like a seesaw in the morning dew. I flipped my ears back over and turned to walk the other way. I shot a man, I said, that went to lay by the swimming pool. I started crying and my mother panicked. She thought something went severely wrong. I said, "Nothing, Mother, nothing happens." This is my last poem. Antigone, half in love with. There's a small hole on the back of my head. I have used it to hide my feelings. It has become a portal and my feelings get lost and Antigone finds them at the mouth of a cave and now my mouth is a cave that speaks out loud. Die I must, I have known this all my life. I can't do anything in moderation. If you want to fuck me, I promise I'll fall in love with you. Every bird chirp and wheel clutching ice is caught over and over again on the meanness of a soul. Call me evil, like the murmur of my name on the lips of darkness. Antigone, only a fool can fall in love with death. So we're foolish then, marching cliffside with a dog yapping at our ankles. Antigone, when will you stop crying? If you reach into the hole in the back of my head, I can hand you a tissue. Valerie, you're in love with impossibility, half in love with.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Again, it's a pleasure to be in workshop with you. Thank you, Jasmine, Misael, and Valerie. And now we can open up the floor for questions. You can use the raise hand function on Zoom, and Alyssa and I will call on you to ask your questions.
Thank you. Valerie, can you talk about the first two poems that you read and like what your like the curation of them and I'm just like curious as to like how they fit with your work and like what that conversation was for you.
Yes. So these are two poems that when I read them really struck me and I just found myself rereading them over and over again. I think the poem From a Drink of Red Mare by Kim Hae-soon was kind of just an example of like this whole body of work that speaks to like the female experience or like women's experience in a household, but also marrying that to like folklore, mythology, and kind of merging language to create like this human out of the non-human, which is kind of something that happens throughout the entire book. So it was really hard for me to choose just one poem. I highly recommend everybody read that book. And from the book Facts for Visitors, we actually read this recently for our poetry workshop, and we haven't had the opportunity to discuss it yet, but reading this poem, like that middle section about the governor's wife and like this idea of bringing in a narrative and unfolding it inside this language that may or may not have anything to do with it was kind of how I like to think of poetry in a way. Like I like to think of the poetry that I write as being able to like lapse between the narrative style and the non-narrative, like bringing language or image to these things that we can't really explain because we don't understand how to explain them, which is also how like myth and fable, like why myth and fable really appeals to me, because this is how humanity kind of made explanations for what we couldn't understand before we could understand them. I don't know if that answered your question.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Sorry, I have a very needy cat with me.
I'll ask a question.
Awesome. Thank you, Valerie.
My connection is super unstable, so I don't even know if you can. I might get booted off. But I was, thank you all for that very beautiful reading. I wanted to hear any one of you or any number of you talk about how reciting your work out loud, like in preparation for a reading or maybe even during the reading, gives you access to different qualities of the text than you may have had before. I just wonder, like, once you like breathe life into the text and you're listening to it, if you hear things differently, affects your editorial process or the way that you hear. I'm going to go ahead and mute because there's a lot of background noise, but thank you all for that beautiful reading.
I guess I can answer that question. I think I don't know. I always get really nervous when I know I have to do these things. So I think that really influences the way I like go back and look at the pieces that I'm deciding whether or not to read. For this reading, that story I read was definitely a little bit longer than what I chose to read, but I think that it's really interesting what reading it out loud does, because there are lots of different parts of that story that aren't included, obviously, but I think I kind of like it better the shorter version, like this way. I think it does a little bit more for the work, and it like hopefully does what I was hoping it would do when I first wrote it. So it's definitely really interesting that I'm like editing as I prepare for this kind of stuff. Yeah, well, for the purpose of the writing, but also just so I don't sound like insane when I'm reading it. Yeah.
Well, I'm remembering Susie F. Garcia's reading last night, and she had this poem, and she was saying something like, "I should like learn how to pronounce these words before like I'm ready to do a reading." And personally, like being bilingual and English being my second language, I feel like I will have to like the whole process of if I have to change a word in my poem because I don't know how to pronounce it, comes strongly many times. And I had two pieces that were driven by the energy of the language and the way like they were formatted. So I just practiced it over and over, and I even made a recording to help me prepare. And it was interesting because in that recording, I did it once and it went like super easy, and I was having some trouble when I was doing the reading today.
Yeah, I think that's just part of it, though, Misa. That happens to me too. Like for this story, the Sakale, I mean, I only know how to pronounce it because I asked Patrick before how to say it. So Patrick's my boyfriend, and he was here sitting listening to me read it, and I was sitting here while Maureen was doing her introduction for me, which was amazing, and I couldn't believe that I didn't know how to say it. So I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh. And I had to ask too. So I think that's just, it's really frustrating, but you know, it's part of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, Misael, like, and both of you, because lately when I'm trying to edit a piece, I'll actually record it on my iPhone. Like I'll read it out loud and record it and listen to it back with my eyes closed as though it weren't mine. And it's really a lot easier to edit, right? Like to kind of figure out where it's efficient and where it's not efficient. And I think just the way that however we come and arrive at the poem or the text, however we meet it in whatever ways, shapes, forms, like I think there isn't like a perfect way of performing a piece, right? That's part of the beauty of it, of the beauty of the encounter. Thank you.
Austin, I see that you have a question. You can go ahead and unmute and ask.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like an okay thing to ask, Jasmine, because it's kind of asking you to explain something. So if you'd rather leave it mysterious, feel free to disregard. But in both this reading and thinking of some of your other pieces from being in workshop with you, I was really struck by the notion of the male figure's eyes changing color, and in general, just your attention to color and like facial expressions generally. And I guess, you know, hearing you introduce your work, I can start to sort of understand how that plays into like your interest in silence. But I don't know, I was wondering if you could speak to that a little.
Yeah, I don't know. I think colors are really important to me just visually. So I'm really interested in how like memory is captured like in silence and like photography and things like that. So visually I feel like that's how I recall certain things, and I feel like if they're not on the page, then the work isn't mine, if that makes sense. So I don't know, I think that it's just something that's like really important to me, and I hope that when I put it on the page it like it reads as that, and it reads as like something that like keys you into that specific image or that specific moment that I'm talking about. Yeah, so I don't know if I can say more than that. I think it's just, I don't know, it's like a tick I have. It's always happening. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
No, yeah, it has almost the it has like the aura of like a very like saturated photograph to me, so that makes a lot of sense.
I wanted to ask Misael a question because it was so exciting to get to hear him read his work today, since we're in workshop together and I'm mostly just reading it on paper. And something that strikes me about your work, one of many things, is just the repeating image of a house that comes up. And particularly in one of your pieces at the end, the line is something like, history was a house, our house, and smoke was eating out its walls. And I know there's a lot of fragmentation of language in your work. You use a lot of slashes and other things to kind of chunk things up. And I wonder if you think of language as something that's kind of within this house, and the fragmentation of language and how that factors into your work when you're writing.
That's an interesting question, because I'm trying to construct this. When I'm the speaker in my poems is a conflicted voice, psychologically trying to deal with between those two languages, and while doing that, the house is falling apart. Not just the house, but everything, all the environment is falling apart. And so I think that's the fragmentation coming across, but it has to do with language and the fact that the speaker doesn't feel that deep connection. The speaker wants to love the language, but there's some tension while trying to access it. I don't hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. I see there's a question from Chloe. You can unmute and go ahead and ask.
Hi, I have a question for Valerie. With her poem, The Anthology of the Wildflowers of the Flowers, about the choice of flower you mentioned in your poem. Was that a conscious decision? Like, was it sort of like a labor of love to choose each type of flower you mentioned? Because I know, for example, you mentioned one of the first ones you mentioned was the buttercups, and buttercups are toxic. Like, you can't eat them, and yet that was what you use that example of eating the buttons of them in your poem. And I just wanted to ask if that was a conscious choice, or if that was just maybe like a choice for alliteration, like the buttons of buttercups, or if that was something else.
So it was a conscious choice. this is probably gonna sound like really messed up. But when I was younger, like that was kind of what they would tell us, like, oh, if you eat this buttercup and it tastes like butter, that means you like butter. So that's kind of where that inspiration came from. And the other flowers and the other plants were plants that grew up in, like that grew in the yard that of the house I grew up in. And those we actually, like, I saw my great grandma and my grandma like pick them and make them into teas for, like, you know, stomach aches and stuff. So part of it is from, they were all conscious choices, yeah, but like I guess it was also, some of it was subconscious. Like as a child, you don't really know that what some of these plants can do for you or do to you. So it was kind of like mixing with like the realities of like danger and like natural healing.
And you know, if there's no other questions, we can just call it a night and say thank you so much to all of our readers and introducers for doing so wonderfully. This was such a treat, even over Zoom. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Misael. Thank you, Jasmine.
Night, guys.
Thank you, Jillian.